Hello and welcome to Telegraph Studio. I'm Alistair Greener and today we're talking about digital transformation. And joining us is Jason Hathaway from Cross Knowledge. Good morning.
Good morning, Alistair.
Now we've heard this term digital literacy. What exactly does that mean?
Digital literacy means mastering three skill sets: technical skills, functional skills, and behavioral skills. Now, what does this actually mean? To answer the question, I like to take the analogy of driving a car. To be a good driver, we obviously have to know how to change gears. So that's a technical skill, right? But we also have to know how to slow down when the roads are wet. That's a behavioral skill. And we also have to know how to analyze traffic density and then to adjust our speed according to that. That's an organizational skill, or otherwise a functional skill. And so mastering all three of these, it's very important because the three skill sets are interdependent and they need to be learned simultaneously, right?
So let's put this into a business context. Why is digital literacy important to organizations today?
Because the workplace is changing. I think that we're living in an era that is very much like the Industrial Revolution, when we saw machines taking people's jobs away from them. And why was that? Well, the machines could do the work more efficiently and faster than the people. And so organizations today are faced with this choice. You know, we have machines and we have people. And I think that rather than look at it as a dichotomy, we have to put the two together. The people have got to learn how to use the machines and become more efficient thanks to the machines.
So that sounds like you're investing a lot into people, but then the organization is going to ask, well, how can I measure that return on investment?
ROI we talk a lot about ROI in training. I was sitting down with Ed Lawler back in April, Ed Lawler at the University of Southern California. Ed's been studying this question for years and years. And obviously, you know, ROI, we talk about the overall comparison of benefits and costs of training. So in benefits, let's start with that. We have two main ones. We want an acquisition of skills, and we can measure those before and after. And we hope that those skills, those newly acquired skills, are going to boost performance of the organization, right, on a grand scale. That in itself can be measured. The costs, we have two types: direct and indirect. By direct costs, we're talking about the actual cost of the training program. How much are we paying trainers? The maintenance of classrooms, etc. But there are also indirect costs that Ed says we often forget to think about. And one of those indirect costs would be, what happens if we develop people and they become more valuable to competitors and then leave the company? That's going to create a cost, isn't it?
Well, that's it, isn't it? Because an organization is going to say, I've spent all this money investing in my people and training them, and then they go off to another organization. You know, where's the benefit for me?
And that's a very good question as well, because when we develop people, that has an impact on their motivation. And motivated employees are loyal employees. So development leads to motivation, motivation leads to loyalty. And I think that that's an equation that any person working in corporate learning needs to keep in mind. Another very interesting story, and I think a lot of people have heard this, it's a little anecdote that really speaks to me. A CFO asks the CEO one day, well, what happens if we train our staff and they leave? And the CEO looks at the CFO and says, but have you thought about what happens if we don't train them and they stay? And I think that this story says it all in this era of digital transformation. What's going to happen if we're not training the staff, right? How are organizations really going to survive?
So let's say I've taken this all on board and I want to write a strategy for digital literacy. What are the sort of questions that I should be asking in order to achieve that process?
Well, I have a little method that I use personally that I call my 5 C's. So I started out a couple of minutes ago by talking about these 3 skill sets, right? They're complementary and they're concurrent. And then the third C, which I'll talk about in a second, would be contextualized, and then we talk about continuous, and then we talk about collaborative. So let's go back. So the first two, concurrent and complementary. So technical skills, functional skills, behavioral skills, like driving a car, like the virtual meeting, we need to learn them simultaneously and we need to master them simultaneously. Now, this is where it leads into contextualization, right? All skills need to be contextualized because driving on slick roads, wet roads, is slightly different from driving on icy roads, isn't it? So in the same context, if I'm talking about digital tools and how I use them at work, let's say I'm doing a virtual meeting with 8 people remotely between Paris, London, and New York. Well, the way that I use that technology is going to be slightly different depending on the number of people I have in the meeting, how well the people know each other. So that needs to be contextualized in order for the skills to be acquired. We need to be very explicit about in which context. Then we can talk about, is the strategy continuous? Because development, when we talk about digital literacy especially, needs to be continuous. It can't just be a one-time thing. Why is that? Many reasons. Digital tools change every day. So if we develop people to use a certain set of tools, those tools are going to be obsolete in a few months, right? And what makes it even more complex, Alistair, is that not only are the digital tools changing, but the management and organizational skills, as well as behavioral skills, are changing as well with the technology. And we need to keep all 3 of those skill sets in our vision when we're elaborating a strategy. And then I talked about the 5th C, which was collaborative or cooperative, if you prefer. Management used to take a very top-down role when it came to training and development, saying, okay, this person needs to go through this training program now, and then that person will follow. While this method is still realistic and it certainly has advantages, and we can't get rid of it completely, the employee needs to have the power to develop him or herself. And I think that this is changing as well. And the organizations have an additional role. The organizations need to give that autonomy to each staff member.
So we understand the solutions and why we need them, but how do you go about actually delivering them?
At Cross Knowledge, we actually deliver integrated and customized solutions. So we're not looking at these skill sets separately. I think a lot of people, again, tend to look at technical skills, well, that belongs to that training program. Behavioral skills, or soft skills as they're often called, that's another training program. At Cross Knowledge, we put them all together, because that's where they belong, right? Cross Knowledge, the logo, it has a triangle, and I think that triangle is very important. First of all, we bring content. We develop and design content with the world's leading experts, top university professors, best-selling authors, and who really are in touch with the latest research and the latest findings when it comes to these skill sets that we're talking about. And we develop and maintain that content with them. Secondly, we bring in our own technologies into organizations. And then thirdly, the content and the technology put together are going to allow the 3rd point of the triangle, which is our services, to go in and design a custom solution for that organization. Let me go back. I was talking about the content. We have tens of thousands of pieces of content. I like to call them bricks. And in fact, I look at these bricks as sort of being, you can put them together to build a completely customized learning solution for that organization. So we make sure that it targets that organization's skill set.
One of your 5 C's was continuous. And we all know that businesses aren't just about the here and now, they're very much about the future. So how can we be sure that your solution is actually sustainable?
First of all, because digital literacy is such a changing discipline, I think that we need to make sure that these training or development programs that we're designing are evolving with the technology, with the management or leadership techniques that we're using, as well as behavioral skills that we're targeting. So, at Cross Knowledge, we update the content that we design all the time, and we're constantly looking at current research, at the top minds. We're talking to them in the world's greatest universities and best-selling authors in management to stay on top of where organizations are and what they need to be doing. So that's one point. The second point is, I think that there's a huge difference as well between information and education. I think that a lot of people tend to confuse the two. And on the market today, I think that there's a lot of information and we're being completely flooded by information. And I think that education, on the other hand, is more long-lasting than information that we can forget. So when we're talking about training, development, education, empowerment, we're talking about something that is lasting right? And then thirdly, I think that when we talk about sustainability, we also need to talk about a certain form of agility when it comes to the learning formats themselves. Because at Cross Knowledge, we realize that learners today have different expectations, have different needs, have different constraints than the learners did, let's say, even 5 years ago. And so today, you walk down the street, take the underground, the subway, everyone's on a mobile phone. Well, that's where learning is actually happening, and that's where it needs to happen. Learning is not happening in front of the computer. It's not happening only in the classroom today. It's happening on the corner of the street. It's happening when I have 2 minutes. So all of the formats need to be mobile. They need to be collaborative. They need to be short. They need to be bite-sized, and the list goes on and on. So learning must evolve with the learners themselves.
Well, you've given us a fascinating insight into digital literacy. Jason Hathaway from Cross Knowledge, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having us.